Welcome to Library Out Loud, a conversation about any and all things related to the Spokane County Library District. Library Out Loud is brought to you by the Spokane County Library District and our friends at STCU. Now, here's your host, Jane Baker.
Hello and welcome to Library Out Loud. I'm Jane Baker, the Communication and Development Director for the Spokane County Library District. Joining me today, a very special guest, we have Paul Lindholdt. Paul, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Very excited to have you here today, and can't wait to get talking about all the things we're going to talk about. But first of all, let's talk about you. You are a professor at Eastern Washington University in the English department.
Yes.
And you've just written this fabulous book called The Spokane River, written and edited. And I was lucky enough to be at the Spokesman Review's book, Northwest Passages, a few weeks ago and heard you talk about the book, picked it up, and I am in love with this book, and I am so thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you.
Yay! So where to start? First of all, tell me a little bit about what made you interested in writing this book? What brought you to this point?
Sure. I practice something in my profession called the environmental humanities. And so that means all things green are subject to my pressure. And the Spokane River hadn't ever had a book, a full-length book. The one thing done in the late 80s was a mere pamphlet. And I thought, it's overdue. It's time. Agree.
Well, I'm glad that you did it. So you had this idea about how long ago?
Took about 2 years from conception to completion.
So then what did you do? Tell me a little bit about your process that you
Sure.
went through to get this going.
Yeah, the process, I went to the people who have the greatest authority about the river, and so that involved a lot of reading beforehand. Okay. I read and read and read and read, and a number of the people I knew already, but then I had to squeeze the chapters from them, and that was not always easy. Some people had already written stuff I could reprint, and others had to be coerced into doing it. Yeah.
Okay. So the research helped you find that the authors that you didn't already know?
Yep.
And then what kind of research, how did you find them? What did you research to find who should contribute?
Well, I wanted people who could write well, I wanted people who knew the history well, and I wanted to bring an edge of science to it also. So those three areas, good writers and people with deep social science backgrounds and hard science, those are my three areas.
And the book is divided into three sections.
Yes.
The first section, kind of a literary wonderful stories. You have Todd Marshall in there, who's a favorite of mine, so that was a big hit right off at the beginning. The second section is cultural and history and society, and then the third section gets a little environmental. Did you plan that from the beginning, or did it just happen?
No, that was my intentional structure from the very beginning.
Oh, excellent. And so then what section did you have to do the most research for?
Probably the middle section. Some of the people there were reluctant as writers. They had a lot of knowledge and specialized knowledge, but they hadn't really put it on paper before, and so I had to baby them along in some cases.
Sure. Well, if you have an English professor ask me to write, that would be a little stressful.
A little intimidating, huh?
So the middle section has some of the cultural and some of the Native American stories, which were very moving. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Native? Did you know history like that, or did you learn something new?
I've been dabbling in history. My PhD is in early American literature and culture, so I do have a lot of background in history, but then I had to bone up for this. And I'm also a contributing historian for HistoryLink, which is a Seattle-based online free encyclopedia of Washington State history.
Oh, wow.
And so that gave me a good head start there.
Yeah. So was there something... What did you learn new in the process of this book that you didn't already know?
the most lasting bit of new knowledge for me was the fact, I want to say, at least a claim of the archaeologists who wrote one of the chapters, that the confluence of the Latah Creek, or what I prefer to call Hangman Creek, and the Spokane River, that confluence is the oldest extant city in what's present-day Washington State.
Wow.
It goes back 8,000 years.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. 8,000 years. So I want to touch on something you just said. Hangman Creek and Latah Creek. Same thing, but there's two different names. And why do you prefer Hangman Creek?
The federal cartographers put it as Hangman Creek, while the state cartographers, state officials, put it as Latah Creek. And it's very complicated, the reason why, but here's my surmise about why. The state wants to cleanse us of our barbarous history of hanging the many members of the Yakima tribe on the banks of that river. So they call it Latah Creek, which is the native dialect for fish, whereas the feds want to remind us of that same barbarous history, and so they call it Hangman to remind us of Colonel George Wright, who hanged the many Indians there in 1858.
Interesting. I think I'm going to adopt that term as well and still call it Hangman Creek. Now, when I was doing a little bit of research for this interview, and I want to say that all the proceeds from the book go to the Spokane River Keepers.
They do.
And I was on their website, and I saw that one of the things that they do is monitor water quality, and Latah Creek, or Hangman Creek, is one of the most polluted waterways in Washington State.
Yes, they argue it as the very most polluted, and visually we can walk along its banks almost any time of year and see how murky or turbid the water is, and we have the visual confirmation of that claim that their scientific research suggests.
Wow, that's interesting, very interesting. I think it's great that you're supporting the River Keepers with this book, and I'm sure they're thrilled about that too, to help raise awareness of the Spokane River. So let's talk some more about the book itself. Now that it's published, what is the biggest takeaway for you?
Well, one of the big surprises, I don't know if it's a takeaway, is that Costco carries it. And I never dreamt that Costco would carry this book. As a writer and scholar, you feel kind of like you've arrived if Costco carries your book.
Carries it, yeah.
That will mean good sales and good proceeds or royalties for the River Keeper itself. But as far as the takeaway in more general terms, I'm so pleased with the reception it has received in Spokane. Everybody has been warmly receiving it, and I have done so many events I can't even count them in the 2 months since it's come out.
Wow, only 2 months.
Yeah. 2.5. Yeah.
And you're into a second printing? Is that
the second printing is imminent.
Oh, that's great. And I know the book. I bought the book from Auntie's, so it's available at Auntie's. It's available at Costco, and I get a kick out of that being the highlight for you, that it's available at Costco. We also have it at the library, and when I went to check it out, there were holds on it, so it's getting read.
I have a friend in a yoga class who, from the beginning, tried to get it from the library, and there were 13 people in line to read it, and now she's down to the 4th in line, so she's going to get it anytime now. Yeah,
that happens with the popular books. You get on hold. When I went to check it out, there was like 25.
Whoa.
So I just went ahead and bought it. I like to check out, but this one had proceeds going to a good cause, and I felt it was a good purchase.
Thank you.
So what is your favorite piece in the book?
The piece that I'm most emotionally responsive to is Jess Walter's piece. It is hilarious, as only Jess can be, and every time I read it, and that's been at least a dozen times now, I still find new things to laugh about. And so he's such a card, and what I chose to do structurally was to end that first section of the impressionistic and narrative portions with his.
Oh, that's great. And I'm assuming that you knew Jess before. He was one of your invited authors?
Yes. I known Jeff since I first moved here in 1994, and I'm fond of saying about him that success couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
Sure. He's fabulous, and what a talent, and he gives a lot to the community. So what a great thing. I have so many things. We had a great conversation going earlier, just before we started recording this. We were talking about being on the river, and you had recently paddled, you said, from downtown to the sewage treatment plant, and that was just the other day.
Yep.
And how was that?
That was great. And it's pretty fast right now, and so you can make that trip in about 2 hours or less than 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And as the season goes on, you're going to bounce off rocks more often, and you're going to take longer. You might get sunburn. So I suggest people go between April and July. It's really a late year.
It gets pretty shallow.
Yeah.
I can almost walk across it in some places from here until the end of August. Yeah.
One of the highlights of our trip last week was we saw beaver at very close range, and it saw us, and it slapped the water in alarm to warn others that we were nearby.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow, how exciting. Yeah. One of those beavers, and the wildlife that you see along there. Now, do you fish as well?
I've given up fishing for the time being. I inherited a whole bunch of fly fishing gear. I might take it back up, but I'm a born-again non-hunter and fisherman. I grew up doing both sports a lot.
Gotcha, yeah. I still see a lot of people fishing along the river. I don't know if they ever catch anything.
Oh, yeah, they do.
They're having a good time out there.
There's a chapter in there by my colleague Bob Bartlett that's a delightful chapter about big fish that get caught again and again and again because it's catch and release in the portion he fishes.
Interesting. Yeah. So we're talking about the Spokane River with Paul Lindholdt, and it's an anthology of sorts, or of sorts it is, an anthology, all different authors that you've assembled, and you've written a piece for it as well as editing and putting it all together. So it's the Spokane River, available at Costco and Auntie's, and we're going to talk more about this book and about the river when we come back here at Library Out Loud.
You might think your vote doesn't count, but that's not true, especially here in Eastern Washington. I'm Jeff Holy, and I'm running for state senate. We are so close to having a Senate that can stand up to West Side politicians who think no tax is ever too high and no regulation ever too hard on Eastern Washington small businesses. Your vote matters. Mark your ballot, Jeff Holy, for state senate, and support Eastern Washington jobs, businesses, and opportunities.
Paid for by Jeff Holy for Senate.
Hi everyone, I'm weather forecaster and assignment anchor at Spokane Talks Online, Colin Pittman, and I am honored to be the host of the new program, Spokane's Youth Spotlight, brought to you by Spokane Talks Online and the Spokesman Review, where we are interviewing and getting to know outstanding youth in our community each month. If you'd like to nominate someone in our community that you think should be recognized, that is doing something great here in the region or has an amazing story, visit SpokaneTalksOnline.com or Spokesman.com and look under Youth Spotlight to nominate. And be sure to tune in each month as we find the best in the Inland Northwest.
Hi, I'm Larry Myers, owner of River Ridge Hardware. Welcome to our garden center here on the corner of Garland and Driscoll. We have fresh plants that come in weekly from all of our local growers. We can make your garden look like our garden. Here at River Ridge, we've been here 30 years. We're your full-service neighborhood hardware store. This is our sprinkler aisle where my knowledgeable staff will help you put together your sprinkler system so it will make your yard lush green for the spring and summer. This is River Ridge Hardware's rental center, where we provide a multitude of equipment for rent for the do-it-yourselfer. Next time you're working on your home or yard this spring and summer, stop by, say hi, and we'll help you get the project done.
See you tomorrow night, and thanks again for taking care of the painting.
I got this.
Bye.
We Weekends are made for painting. Let the experts at Rada Paint take care of you.
Hi. This looks amazing.
Rada Paint, over 80 years of quality, tradition, and trust. Find it in every can.
And welcome back to Library Out Loud. I'm Jane Baker. My guest today is Dr. Paul Lindholdt, the author and editor of The Spokane River, and that is what we're talking about today, this anthology that you have assembled, and beautiful stories and great stuff. So I'm thrilled that you're here. First of all, let's talk quickly about the cover.
Sure.
The cover, I looked at it right away. These are kind of my stomping grounds when I grew up, and I looked at it right away and thought, oh, I know exactly where that is, just below the Post Falls Dam. But you were surprised by the choice of the cover.
Yeah, when you go with a university press or a trade press, you relinquish a good bit of control about the design and marketing of the book. And so those of us who wrote the book thought that there would be a wild portion of the river depicted there, but instead it's a very, very tame portion. And I'm sure the people at the University of Washington Press had their reasons for doing that. But I'm very pleased that the photo was taken by Ashel Curtis, the brother of Edward Curtis, a great Indian photographer.
So you have any idea when this photo was taken?
It would be almost a century ago that photo was taken.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Yeah, it did catch my attention that it was on the cover. Usually when you think of the Spokane River, maybe because I live in Spokane, is right away I go to the falls. I think about the falls, or maybe the Bowl and Pitcher area. So this was interesting, but this is where the river kind of starts.
You got it.
Right out of there. So it's right at the beginning and at the front of the book. So that works. Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about the hard science. You said it's not the part that it's not necessarily the sexiest part of the book.
Not the part that people would go to first off.
Sure.
So very deliberately I structured it so the fine writing, so to speak, that is the most accessible writing is at the beginning, so people who don't read a lot can find themselves captured by those early stories, all of them narrative. And then as we work through history, Native Americana, and the hard sciences at the end, and I'm very excited about that part, and I hope people make it all the way through to get there. And,
sure.
And one of the highlights for me is a essay about fisheries in the Spokane River historically by my Professor Emeritus colleague Al Schultz. And he has done several books on fisheries in the Columbia Basin, and this one reveals most memorably to me the fact that these big fish, the Chinook salmon, came upstream all the way to Idaho, 60-pounders, and now, of course, they can't get above the Grand Coulee Dam.
Sure.
So it's a great tragedy, and he's very emotionally tied up with that.
Sure.
Second one I wanted to mention is a rare collaboration between two scientists of different disciplines. One's an aquatic entomologist, which is a bug expert, and the other is a geologist. And so they came together to write about water quality and the giant salmon fly, and they also went clear upstream to the Silver Valley to talk about the compromises to water quality that impact all of us who use the river.
Wow, that's and that's towards the end. I have to get there still, but I'm going to make sure to read that part. That's pretty interesting. I know that when I saw you a couple weeks ago at the Spokesman, you had mentioned rewilding. Am I saying it correctly?
I'd love to talk about that.
You got the audience a little interested in that. Yeah, worked up.
They held my feet to the fire a little bit on that one.
Yeah.
And I think I gave the mistaken impression that I was recommending we let the river ecologically do what it will, and that was objectionable to people. But in fact, it's the final chapter by my friend Greg Gordon, who's the director of environmental studies at Gonzaga University, and his recommendation is that we look beyond restoration and pulling weeds and killing exotic species, that we give it up and just let nature have its way with the river. And that took a lot of people in the audience by surprise.
It did. You started getting questions, and I recall sitting there thinking, This gentleman's an author. He's not a fish and wildlife biologist. Are you asking the right guy the questions?
Yeah.
But just that idea got people a little riled up.
And I can give one example of the riled up question that I got. Somebody wanted to say, we need to get rid of all of the spiny ray fish, the bass and the pikes and the perch and so on that are coming into the river. And my answer was, and still is, that they're warm water fish, and until we make the water colder by releasing more water through the dams or removing dams, they're going to find suitable habitat.
It's just too warm right now. So this is a totally unplanned question on the dams. What do you think about removing the dams?
It was interesting to me, one of the headlines in the past week in the Spokesman Review was that our two congressional candidates, Kathy McMorris Rogers and Lisa Brown, both say the lower Snake River dams are staying in, and neither of us favors removing them. But I make no secret of the fact that I favor removing them, and I think that in due time we're going to look at alternative energies, and we're going to look at the dams having worn out not only their welcome, but the technology that built them. And I think that we'll see a freer flowing Spokane River if we live long enough.
Yes, that's good news. And also at the Spokesman that night, we were talking about salmon. And someone, I don't think it was you, but somebody said salmon in the past tense. And it was brought up that that is not true.
Yes.
Do you see the salmon coming back then?
Yes. I think that was a guy who interviewed me, the outdoors editor, Eli Frankovich. He confessed that he has spoken of them, misspoken of them in the past tense, and I believe almost superstitiously that language dictates the course of our culture, and so I wanted to speak of them in the present tense because they do still come up the river, and once those dams are removed, they might come all the way. And there is some progress being made by the tribes. There is a coalition of tribes that are seeking to bring salmon back to all of the rivers above Grand Coulee, including ours.
Wow, that would be great.
Yeah.
Coalition of the local tribes, then I'm assuming the Spokanes and the
Eastern
Yakimas,
Washington and Eastern Oregon tribes, yes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
They're doing some great work, the tribes
they
are
are.
with that. And
Yes, they are.
of course, it's their heritage, and we want to support them all we can. Speaking of support, the proceeds from this book go to the Spokane River Keepers, and you can find out more about them at SpokaneRiverKeeper.org, but they're a nonprofit organization, and they do litter cleanup events, always looking for help with that. They also sit on the Regional Toxics Task Force. They do education and outreach. They monitor water quality, and they hold railroads accountable. What a great group to benefit from the proceeds of sales from this anthology. And again, it's available at Costco. Costco, Aunties. You can check it out at any library here in the Spokane area, or borrow it, read it. Read it. That's all I can say. It is definitely worth reading. Plans for another book?
I have another book coming out this year, as a matter of
Really?
fact. Yeah, and beyond that, I am unwilling to talk about a future project. I'm almost superstitious, but the book I have coming out in December is a book of poetry.
Oh, lovely.
And it's deeply historical, like this one is. It's set in New England in the 17th century.
Wow. Wow, you're a busy guy. And then when you're not busy writing and doing wonderful works like this, then you are teaching at Eastern. And what kind of classes do you teach? I know you're in the English department, but
Yeah, English departments have many different branches, and mine is literature, so I teach literary studies.
if I went back to school, I'd take a class from you.
Oh, good.
Yes. And do you have plans for paddling this week?
Biking along the river via the Centennial Trail to Long Lake and back from downtown.
Oh, that sounds
Tomorrow.
absolutely wonderful. Yes, absolutely
Thank
wonderful.
you for having me.
Thank you for being here today, and I do hope you're very busy getting out promoting this book. And you said there's been a lot of reaction since you were at the Spokesman. I'm so glad to hear that, and I appreciate all the work you've done to raise awareness of the Spokane River. It is irreplaceable and so important, and your work is very much appreciated.
Thanks again.
All right, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time on Library Out Loud.
Patrick Johnson is honored to seek your vote for Spokane County District Court Judge, Position 1. Patrick is a committed public servant, having served 20 years at the Spokane County Prosecutor's Office, where he has prosecuted serious felony cases. Patrick is also a major in the U.S. Army Reserve's Judge Advocates General Corps, where he defends the legal rights of those who defend America. Patrick is seeking to replace Judge Peterson, who is retiring this year. Join Judge Peterson and the dozens of current and former judges who endorse Patrick Johnson for judge.
Library Out Loud is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Ask a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksOnline.com. Library Out Loud is brought to you by the Spokane County Library District and STCU. Go visit and explore your local library today.